The Galactic Empire prided itself on dominance. It had crushed 100 worlds, absorbed species into its ever-growing machine, and enforced its rule with cold, calculated efficiency. Their war doctrine was simple: brute force, superior firepower, and overwhelming numbers. Against such power, resistance was futile. Humans were no exception. The Empire saw them as primitive, reckless creatures who still relied on outdated projectile weapons and laughable battlefield tactics. Their so-called camouflage was a relic of an ancient past, a desperate attempt to blend into nature when modern warfare had long since moved beyond such trivialities. Thermal scans, electromagnetic sensors, AI-assisted targeting. These were the tools of a true war machine, and the Empire wielded them with devastating precision. Camouflage? Obsolete. Stealth? A myth. Against the might of the Empire, there was no hiding. When the order came to conquer Theta 9, the generals barely acknowledged the assignment. A backwater human colony, barely worth the effort. The fleet descended in overwhelming force, armored dropships casting enormous shadows over dense green forests and sprawling hills. Troops poured onto the ground in perfect formation, shimmering energy shields humming, sleek armor gleaming under the twin suns. This was not a battle. This was extermination. The first few engagements went as expected. Human militia fell like wheat before the scythe, their defenses crumbling under the weight of plasma bombardments. Resistance was sporadic, scattered pockets of fighters retreating into the trees. The Empire laughed. The battle was over before it began. Then something changed. The reports were minor at first. A single squad missing during a routine patrol. A lieutenant found dead, his helmet visor shattered by some crude projectile. The commanding officers dismissed it as human desperation. But the incidents continued. More disappearances. More bodies. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Soldiers whispered about shadows in the trees. Entire platoons failed to report in. The Empire's AI trackers found nothing, no heat signatures, no movement, no enemy forces. It was as if their own men were vanishing into thin air. The general scoffed. Ridiculous. Superstition. Weakness. Yet, when another group of elite scouts failed to return, he ordered a full combat sweep. Drones scoured the forest, scanning with every available sensor. Nothing. No bunkers. No enemy strongholds. Just trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. The soldiers grew uneasy. They could feel something watching them, just beyond their vision. The air was too still. The shadows too deep. And then, without warning, another shot rang out. A captain dropped, a fist-sized hole in his visor. Panic set in. The troops opened fire blindly into the trees, plasma bolts searing the underbrush. There was no return fire. No enemy positions revealed. Just silence. Something was out there. Something they couldn't see. The Empire relied on its machines to see, to track, to kill. But in the dense wilderness of Theta 9, their sensors were blind, and their algorithms useless. They had never faced an enemy like this, one that didn't charge into battle, didn't engage in direct combat, didn't even seem to exist. Captain Elias Vance waited, hidden beneath layers of adaptive nanofiber, his body motionless against the damp earth. His suit bent light, masked thermal signatures, and disrupted electromagnetic scans. To the Empire, he was nothing but an empty patch of forest. They were searching for him now, dozens of soldiers moving in careful formations, weapons scanning, visors glowing in the low light. He watched their movements, noted their predictable sweeps, their reliance on proximity scanners and AI-assisted targeting. None of it mattered. They had been trained to fight an enemy they could see. A three-man fire team passed within meters of his position. He waited for the exact moment when they turned away, then adjusted his aim. Slow breath, steady hands. One squeeze of the trigger. A silent impact. The lead soldier collapsed before the others even registered the sound. Panic spread instantly. They spun in all directions, weapons raised, scanning, searching. There was nothing. No movement. No target. Just an empty forest, and the body of their fallen comrade. Vance had already repositioned. Another shot. Another soldier dropped. The last one broke, sprinting for cover, shouting into his comms. No response. He would die alone. The main force heard the gunfire. Officers barked orders. Troops adjusted formations. Drones deployed, sweeping the area with high-frequency scans. But the enemy they hunted was no longer there. He was already moving, shifting position, circling them like a predator in the dark. A sniper didn't just kill. A sniper controlled the battlefield. The Empire's forces had stopped advancing. They were reacting now, responding to an enemy they couldn't see, hesitating when they should have pushed forward. Their cohesion was cracking. Every wasted second, every frantic step, every burst of gunfire at shadows brought them closer to collapse. The general still believed in his technology, in the overwhelming power of his army. He had yet to understand the truth. His men were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. The soldiers no longer moved with purpose. Their formation had crumbled, their discipline shattered. Fear clung to them like a sickness. Every shadow held death. Every whisper of wind carried the promise of another unseen shot. They had stopped hunting. Now they were prey. Vance could hear them breathing through their helmets, rapid and uneven. He could see their fingers twitching on triggers, their heads snapping toward phantom threats. They were exhausted, deprived of sleep, nerves frayed beyond repair. Some had abandoned their posts entirely, running blind into the trees, breaking one of the Empire's strictest rules: never flee the battlefield. It no longer mattered. Orders were meaningless when survival instincts took over. The High Command was in disarray. They had deployed elite trackers, specialized drones, experimental sensor arrays. All useless. Their technology had no answer for a sniper they couldn't detect, for a ghost that faded into the landscape. The general's frustration boiled over into desperation. His soldiers were supposed to be the best in the galaxy, trained in thousands of campaigns. Yet here they were, losing to one man. Vance exploited their panic. He let them feel safe, then struck again. A sniper rifle round punctured a fuel cell, turning a supply drop into a fireball that scattered burning debris across the camp. The explosion sent soldiers scrambling for cover, only for another to drop mid-sprint, lifeless before he hit the ground. No warnings. No mercy. Only death from the void. Then he changed tactics. Psychological warfare. He hijacked their comm channels, whispering into their encrypted frequencies. You were dead the moment you landed. A voice from nowhere, from everywhere. Their communications officers frantically searched for the breach. There wasn't one. Vance had hardwired a transmitter into one of their fallen units, repurposing their own tech against them. Panic turned to full-scale collapse. Officers screamed conflicting orders. Some demanded a full retreat. Others refused to believe they were losing. The general's voice broke through the static, barking for orbital support, calling for a purge of the entire sector. If they couldn't kill the sniper, they would wipe the battlefield clean. Vance had expected this. The moment the command came through, he activated a countermeasure, a relay spike planted hours earlier, buried beneath fallen leaves. The general's request was intercepted, rerouted, and scrambled beyond recognition. To High Command, it would sound like garbled static. No reinforcements. No bombardments. No escape. The soldiers were on their own. Some turned on each other. Blame flew. Accusations of incompetence, of betrayal. A sergeant executed a subordinate for attempting to flee. Another fired blindly into the brush, screaming at ghosts. Vance watched. Waited. Picked them off one by one. By nightfall, half their forces were dead. The rest would not survive the morning. The survivors didn't fight anymore. They didn't search, didn't call for reinforcements. They huddled together, eyes darting at nothing, fingers trembling over triggers they were too afraid to pull. Their enemy had become the night itself, a phantom that struck without warning and faded without trace. They had arrived on Theta 9 as conquerors. Now they were just waiting to die. The general had no more orders, no more plans. His forces had been gutted, not by overwhelming firepower, but by something far worse, something they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't understand. He had led countless campaigns, crushed entire civilizations, but nothing had ever prepared him for this. He had no enemy to face, just death, slow and methodical. The Empire did not believe in retreat. It was better to die than return in failure. But survival had a way of rewriting loyalty. Soldiers began abandoning their gear, stripping away their armor, crawling through the mud like desperate animals, hoping to escape the unseen hunter. Vance let them run. The real threat wasn't them, it was the lesson they would carry back. The Empire needed to know that humanity wasn't weak, that stealth wasn't obsolete, that no amount of firepower could protect them from an enemy they never saw coming. By dawn, the last stragglers had fled. The battlefield was silent. The forest had swallowed the dead, their armor useless against the patient, unrelenting force that had hunted them down. The mighty war machine of the Empire had met something it could not outgun. Vance exfiltrated without a trace, leaving only empty helmets and unanswered questions behind. The Empire would remember this day. The name Theta 9 would become a ghost story whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale about arrogance and underestimation. A war was coming, and next time they wouldn't see it either.